All right, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the Bloor Group's webinar series with Athena Solutions. Yours truly, Eric Kavanagh, is here, and I can't miss an opportunity to promote our TV show. I call it the world's first made for TV webinar series, Future Proof. Check your local listings, especially if you're in Silicon Valley, Atlanta, Champaign-Urbana, Washington, D.C., and now we're in New Hampshire as well, a couple other places, about 6, 7 markets around the country. Check your local listings for Future Proof, a show that's all about how today's technology designs tomorrow. So let's dive in. Are data catalogs now mission critical? I think the answer is closing in on yes. So our speakers today, Aaron Wilson, a consultant with Athena Solutions, yours truly, and Kirit Basu, who I've known for a number of years now and is over at a company called Metaphor Data, doing very interesting stuff in the data catalog space. Aaron will do most of the presentation, then myself, and then Kirit will tag on at the end. So data catalogs, well, catalogs have been around for a long time. You could argue that hieroglyphics are a form of cataloging information. They used to use them to list how many bales of wheat they sold or how many cattle or whatever the case was. A lot of that stuff was mathematical and it was just inventory that they were keeping track of. So catalogs have been around for a long, long time. Card catalogs, of course, came along and really facilitated discovery and learning at libraries. That's good stuff, right? And data dictionaries in like the 70s and 80s, we started to see some interesting things happening there. They're getting a bit more sophisticated. The early days of the database world, quite frankly. And in the 90s, IBM's DB2 catalog, Oracle SQL catalog, you started to see this attention being paid to metadata and capturing metadata and managing metadata. And I can tell you one of my observations 24 years ago when I picked up a client called Qualaware after I'd been laid off from a business intelligence consulting firm. He did some metadata management, and I remember asking him, I was like, all these vendors I talk to have their own metadata management repository. Wouldn't it be great if we could like agree on some standard and then all be using the same metadata? Wouldn't that facilitate integration and collaboration? And he smiled and said, "Yeah, I'm pretty sure it would." And anyway, about another decade went by before there was any concerted effort in the industry to focus on that. And of course, we have master data management, which we've used to virtually reconcile systems. But what I'm seeing is these data catalogs are really catching fire these days, and they kind of need to. We need to be able to have a meaningful understanding of what all this data means in our organization, especially for new employees, but also for people who've been around for a while, also for partners. So they're important and they're really growing. In the 2000s, it really started to take off, and we'll get into some of those bits of functionality when Aaron and Kirit talk in a minute. So all this got me thinking about what I call old IT versus new IT. And old IT is still around, it's still very prevalent, but I would argue it's giving way to new IT. So what is old IT? It's imperative, meaning the programming is imperative. You give specific instructions to the system of what to do when. It's inside out. So you deploy a system somewhere in your data center and then you work incrementally to flesh it out and connect it to other things. That takes a lot of time. That's another aspect of old IT. It's very time intensive. Who raise your hand if you remember in the early 2000s how long it would take to stand up a data warehouse? We're talking 6 months it could take. You define a schema, you do all this ETL stuff, and then what happened? Once you get it up and running, someone said, "Oh, I want to change the schema." And they said, "No bueno." Like, we're not going to do that. Then, of course, Snowflake comes along, separates compute from storage. Pretty interesting development there. So now we're starting to get into the new IT, and what does all that mean? So new IT, I would argue, is declarative. So instead of giving it specific instructions how to do something, you tell the system your desired end state. I want this to be the case. Go figure it out. The system does that for you. New IT is also more outside in. You're trying to pull stuff from outside and use what you get from the outside to change what's on the inside. You're really using what's already happening. This is a trend I've seen for a while now, and it's very clever. There was a company, as a bit of an aside, called VanillaSoft I ran into before COVID at the marketing conference in Boston. And I remember what they did was they would sit on top of your existing CRM and Salesforce and all these different systems, and they would then tell the salesperson who to call next. So it's not so much the salesperson cherry picking who he or she wants to call. No, the system will tell them, hey, We just noticed that 3 people from GE were on the website. Call your contact at GE next. So that's sort of an outside in approach. You're leveraging what's already happening. I think it's very clever. Another thing that I've seen is sitting on top of email and leveraging email as the interface through which you submit suggestions. So this concept of using existing applications where the person is already working and weaving in functionality from a data catalog, from an MDM system, from an AI system, that's very clever because you are facilitating the fluidity of workflow. And that's very important. People don't like their jobs to be truncated. They don't like to be distracted. They don't have to want to have to jump from system to get things done. So the more you can tap into existing systems and feed your users the data they need, the insights, the suggestions they can use in their environment, the better off you're going to be. So new IT also gets rolling much faster. That does mean you have to check for things. Everyone's talking about Gen AI, how exciting it is. You know what? It makes mistakes and they are generative. It's generative by nature. So be careful about some of these AI technologies, how, where, and when you deploy them, because 80% accuracy is not very good. 80% accuracy, I should say, is not very good. What percentage of your business can be wrong 20% of the time? Well, not much. So with that, I'm going to say, don't do it yourself. Bring in the big guns. I'm going to stop sharing and let Aaron Wilson share. And feel free to send questions in, folks, at any point during the webinar.
Okay. Okay. Did everybody see that?
Yep, looks good.
All right, great. So thanks, Eric, and thanks for the opportunity to come on the show once again. Some folks in the audience may have tuned in to a couple of episodes that Athena did a while back, which explored the topic of data catalog platforms. And in this one, we're going to look at it from a little bit of a different point of view, namely the point of view of actual data practitioners, and find out what they think. So this show is going to be based around research that we at Athena have been doing since about April. And we worked in conjunction with Eric and came up with some survey questions, distributed them out to contacts that we had, people who work in data in various roles. And the responses to some of these questions are pretty interesting. And we're going to take a look at that in the results today. Always like to start off with a quick introduction to Athena. There's Alex Kangoon, CEO, Alice Eichen, head of the data governance practice, and myself there. We're a small consultancy that has been helping clients since 2002 with challenges relating to business intelligence, data governance, data architecture. As this slide says, we bridge the gap between our customers' data and the insights that they need. So moving on from there, talk a little bit about the survey itself and what went into it. We sent the survey out to several contacts who had roles in various data-related capacities, and 12 questions, but which doesn't sound like a lot right off the bat. But one of those questions was basically a 10-parter, so it's actually a pretty comprehensive survey, we felt. 24 people responded, which more is always better, but honestly, I felt like that was a pretty good response rate. You know, getting people to take time to fill out a survey is not always easy when people have other things to do. And the respondents represent a mix of people from areas such as data governance, analytics, reporting, and architecture. So I feel like we got a pretty good cross-section, actually. So moving on to our first question. And the first question was pretty broad and kind of gets right to the point. How critical do you believe is having a functioning data catalog for an organization? And this result, I would say, confirms what we would probably expect. I think it definitely shows you that the respondents, rate the importance of data catalog very highly. You can see a lot of people putting either in the kind of number 4, very important category, or 5, most critical category. And I would say this kind of confirms what we would think There's some probably self-selection bias in here. One has to keep in mind that if people take time to fill out a survey about data catalog, they probably are highly interested in data catalog. But I think it means this particular result means that we're off to a good start. And we're on the right track with covering this topic and it being a very important topic in the data landscape. So moving on from there, we're going to get into these questions where we talk about, capabilities. The first one we'll look at is automated discovery and metadata capture. So for those who are unfamiliar, although I suspect most of you have some idea of what we're talking about there, automated discovery is the ability of particularly newer generation of data catalogs to scan and skim and ingest metadata, things like column names, variable types, in some cases, even data definitions and lineage, and be able to pull that data actually from your underlying data assets, data warehouses, ETL, etc. So this is one of the really cutting edge features that's come up in the last, I'd say, 4 or 5 years that makes harvesting metadata and gathering it a lot easier with these newer platforms. And not surprisingly, our respondents gave it a pretty high ranking. The next three here are going to be, the next three categories came up as the highest ranking, the most important categories from our, respondent group. And so we're going to take these one by one. I think these all kind of make sense, starting with business context enrichment. Sometimes I wonder who comes up with these category names, but business context and enrichment, because I wouldn't know unless I was sort of knee deep in this stuff. But when we talk about that, we're talking about really the ability to kind of like tag data, being able to link a particular column or data point to let's say, is that data point external or internal? How critical is it? Who is the data owner? And to be able to put contextual information around data. And as you can see, we got a really strong positive with this particular category. I think that makes sense. It confirms, I think when we look at the sort of the core functional areas of data catalogs and what people are looking for, this is definitely one of them. So I think it makes sense that we saw this coming up as a really strong result. Moving on to data lineage. I would say that this would also fall into sort of core functionality for data catalogs, right? The ability to do lineage. Lineage, of course, being the ability to visually represent the data flow, where a data element comes from in terms of source data and ETL. Potentially all the way back to source system and also downstream. Very strong showing here for data lineage. And I think, again, it makes sense. A data catalog platform, once properly implemented, one of the big benefits is that, you can pull lineage essentially on demand, right? Once it's properly configured. So not too surprising that our respondents gave lineage a very high ranking. And a similarly strong result for search and navigation, right? And actually, this was, I think, the only one where we got basically all of our panelists either putting that into the highly important or most important category. And again, this makes sense because when we talk about, data catalog, if the purpose of a data catalog is to promote knowledge and transparency around our data, really search and navigation dictates how quickly we can get to that. We can get to that, that information, and learn about the data in an organization. Search and navigation is extremely important to that. And search is another area that has really come up. Search has changed a lot. Anyone who's even run a simple Google search, recently can tell you that, it's more and more we're able to use natural language, segmented and filtered searches, and that is, I think, contributing to the value the data catalog is adding because a lot of these sort of more sophisticated search technologies are coming into play. I guess I'll pause there and see if there's any any comments from some, say, Eric or Kirit on what we've got so far in terms of the responses that we've gotten?
Yeah, no, I think it's very interesting, and I think it makes sense. Like you said, most people are saying yes, it's very important. I mean, I got the idea for the webinar. Our data catalog is now mission critical from these responses, and these are people in the industry who use these technologies. So that's who you want to hear from are people who are working with these technologies day to day and understand the importance and the relevance and why you need to be looking at this space if you're not yet in the game.
Yes, agreed. Um, yeah, that's why some of these results are so interesting. Like I said, we sort of just ran through the top three in terms of what came through, and search, lineage, and then business context enrichment. We're going to move on through some of the remaining categories here. Collaboration and knowledge sharing. What I found interesting about this result, right, is that we didn't see a lot of people rate that as the most important aspect, but we had a ton of people come in with, highly important, kind of like the next level down. And um, I'm sort of tempted to analyze that result and say, that also makes sense to me, really, because if you don't have, the core functionality of, business context, of search, etc., then you really don't have anything. But kind of once you have that, then the next piece of really well functioning data catalog and really adding value to data governance is oftentimes this collaboration and knowledge sharing, which a lot of the really good data catalog platforms that are out there. We're going to be talking to Kirit in a moment. They've placed a heavy emphasis on this collaboration and knowledge sharing aspect because it really, once you've got your data catalog set up, you want it to be a living, breathing thing, and you want people to be able to participate and collaborate. And so even though this doesn't come up, in the most important category for a lot of people, it's definitely significant because you can kind of see how it's right in that next level down. And in order to kind of, in the interest of time, because we have a lot to cover here, the next few categories, we'll just take a look at them, but I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on them. But what they really show is, I think, first of all, that we constructed the survey probably pretty well. These all may not have gotten as high a marks as some of the categories we just looked at, but people view them as varying levels of importance, but mostly pretty important. So the ability to integrate your data catalog with your data governance framework, for example, around policies and so forth, was got a pretty good showing here. Self-service access comes up as pretty important, and that's really, when you have that, that gives you the ability to kind of disseminate, the data catalog and the ability to use it, amongst really everyone in the organization, right? Not just your technical people. Security and access controls, not necessarily the first thing you think of, but it is very important, particularly when we talk about issues of data privacy, right? And most of the data catalog, vendors have incorporated that and really and emphasized that in their products. Scalability, scalability I find funny just because it's not important until it is. Uh, and then all of a sudden it's really important. So, but yes, obviously, if you can't scale, if you have a growing business and you can't scale, you've got a significant problem. So scalability, pretty important criteria there. Extensibility, you really want data catalog, your platform, to be able to integrate and work seamlessly with other tools that you have, right? So of course, seems to be broad agreement that's also an important category as well. And moving on from here, this is where we get into, kind of get out of the categories and into some kind of broader questions that really are around approach, questions about implementation. And this slide in particular, I thought was pretty interesting. The result what we got, we basically said which type of technology solution really should a company use when implementing a data catalog. And what I found interesting was the enterprise-wide vendor solution comes out way out in front among some of these other choices. I one of the reasons I find that interesting is because if you talk to some of the technical people, people involved in the development side of data catalog, they're very excited about the open platforms such as open metadata, data hub, etc. Um, but amongst our panel group, our respondent group, there seems to be a pretty clear preference for vendors, enterprise scale vendors. Um, and with Kirit as part of our panel, he'll probably be pleased to see that. The vendor space is alive and well, and amongst data practitioners is, I would say, looked at as the go-to. So definitely an interesting result there. Um, Moving on from here, thinking of your organization, what is the ideal resource solution when undertaking a data catalog product? Now, I would say pretty much confirms what I would have expected. Internal solution, not necessarily the most popular option. You'd have to have a lot of confidence in your team in order to, because it's a big undertaking if you just want to do it internally. Um, there are a couple people that don't have a definitive plan yet, and that is okay. um, but kind of a subtle difference between the last two, partnership with a data catalog vendor and then the hybrid approach. I would say hybrid approach is really kind of open-ended. In other words, the idea that, whatever help that, you can avail yourself of, including maybe outside consultants, etc., whatever it takes. I think that's pretty common when trying to stand up a product, is that, you need a variety of resources for implementation to be successful. So I think that's what we're seeing there. Um, this one's, I don't really know quite what to make of this one, except for the fact that some of our respondent group probably isn't necessarily involved in the, let's say, cost end of the equation, which isn't terribly surprising, right? But we have a variety of perspectives on, what they think a reasonable cost for a data catalog solution might be, with the most popular result being don't know. Uh, so I would imagine that if we got an accounting group together, that they would probably have a little bit different perspective on that, but an interesting result nonetheless. And moving on from there, what do you believe the top two challenges facing organizations regarding to beginning an enterprise data catalog project? This is interesting. The most popular and the categories that people seemed to emphasize the most were really around understanding in the organization, right? So getting the appropriate buy-in and support from management and business, understanding the value of a data catalog, and then the most common response: lack of overall data maturity in the organization. And I would say that that's, from people that I've talked to, that confirms what really seems to be, the data people seem to be fighting an uphill battle sometimes in organizations to really get various people to increase understanding. Adoption is extremely important with these platforms, and really, there's an education effort that's underway, that's just as important as the actual implementation. And I would imagine, and I'll kind of open this up for comment in a second again, but I'll imagine that Eric and Kirit may probably concur with that. What do you believe in organizations really struggle with during data catalog implementations? Some interesting perspectives there. I would say what was interesting to me was that the top result clearly was no clearly defined processes for maintaining and using data catalog. So I think our group has definitely probably already grappled with the fact that, once you set up a data catalog, once you've got it up and running, then, there's a whole other piece, which is, getting processes and procedures together so people really understand how to use it and how you can, as much as you want to emphasize collaboration and bringing adoption in, you also want to have it be orderly and have processes and procedures so people really understand how to use it. And let's see what else we have. Oh, last slide. This is just a quick snapshot of the vendor space. The main thing I actually would take away from this, we just basically asked people, which data catalog vendors are you familiar with? What this shows me is that it's still a pretty open space. we're not in a world just yet where we have, let's say, one or two leaders. Clearly, I mean, we have a diverse um, array of vendors who are all, bringing different value adds into the space, and I think it remains to be seen. You know, if a couple of these vendors wind up on top, I think what we have is some really healthy competition in the space at this point. So that kind of takes me to the conclusions here. Um, First of all, I'd say general agreement once again, data catalogs are important. Okay, I think we've got confirmation of that. Critical functionality, as I said, clearly the top three: business context, enrichment, search, and lineage. With a lot of these, I don't want to call them secondary, but there are a lot of other components that are also viewed as extremely important, kind of down from those top three. Firm-wide vendor solutions, the clear favorite amongst our respondent group, which I found interesting, given that we've got these open source players, and of course homegrown data catalog is another option, right? But vendor solutions clearly the favorite. Lack of understanding and organizational data maturity. So our respondent group definitely recognizes that standing up the product is just challenge number one. We really need to promote understanding in the organization with these tools. Processes and procedures, yet another sort of post-implementation effort, getting people to understand how to use the product, and so that they can use it effectively. So I hope you found these results as interesting as we did. I would look forward to maybe a little bit more detail. We're going to be producing an article, which will be available on the Athena website, where we kind of explore this a little further. But with that, I would just want to say thank you to all of our viewers today, and of course, thank you to all of our respondents who, really made this possible for us to put this data together and get some interesting insights.
Yeah, I think you did a great job, and I love your analysis of the data. I was like you, I was a little bit surprised at how staunchly in favor of enterprise proven technologies the respondents were. You didn't see a lot of love for the open source stuff. You didn't see a lot of love for the roll your own. I think there have been some lessons learned, even though some of the biggest companies in the world roll their own, right? Like Google and Meta and all these other guys, they build things themselves. But hey, with that, let's bring in Kirit Basu of Metaphor Data, a company that may not have been on the radar of many people, but should be now. Some very interesting stuff. So, Kirit, take it away to give us your thoughts.
Great. Thank you. And thank you, Aaron. That was a great presentation. I absolutely, agree with all of those sentiments over there. And I think, the whole point about why do people go in for like enterprise vendors, et cetera, that really speaks to the criticality of this thing, right? Like people want to get high quality service that can, do stuff for them, really accelerate their growth in data. And that's why the mission criticality goes pretty well with the enterprise nature of this. So with that super short intro, I'm the head of product here at Metaphor Data. We call ourselves a social platform for data, and really like the main key item over here is that if you have catalogs which are just technical catalogs where you can get all that metadata, get all that lineage, and then do nothing with it, you're kind of screwed. The catalog doesn't really go further beyond that. Also, a lot of times to do more with the catalog, you have to spend a huge amount of effort. There has to be a vision for it. There has to be a person in charge of it for it, etc. And we've found that those are, in fact, kind of dated at this point. There are better ways for us to engage. And that's why our social platform for data is really about making people, allowing people to connect with data no matter what their role in the organization is. They could be a highly technical data savvy person, or they could just be a business user just looking for some information. So we bring it all together in one platform and make it very organic for people to discover and use data. High level, that's kind of what we're saying. There is a huge AI component to this. This is something where we, certainly are trying to stay on the cutting edge of AI, and we're bringing that in very selectively. To be very clear, we all understand AI is still pretty much in its infancy, but we're trying to look at particular areas where we can help, where we can be confident of helping our customers, and we bring that in and make that a part of the experience. End of the day, this is kind of what our platform comes together as. We go and collect metadata. So Aaron, to your point, people want metadata to be collected automatically. They want lineage to be collected automatically. Yes, that's, those are kind of out of the box. We get all of that stuff and, bring the data into our environment. We also allow people to define and collect business-oriented metadata. So think glossaries, documentation, et cetera, et cetera. And then finally, the social piece is where, like, what are people doing with data? What are they talking about? Where are they using it, et cetera? That provides yet another facet that we can bring together and, basically create a catalog experience that is orders of magnitude different than what you've been used to in the past. Right. And to that end, so sure, we have a web application where everything comes up, but we also have first-class integrations within Slack and Teams where people could just ask questions and get the answers that they want to. We have an integration into browser extensions. So when you're looking at a Snowflake console, or you're looking at a Power BI dashboard, you just want to know, can I trust this data? Where is it coming from? I have questions, things of that sort. And then here's the other piece for the extensibility part. Certainly developers can take our catalog and customize it for themselves, but also we have all of that exposed via a SQL data warehouse. And so we basically take all of that metadata in this fused form and present it back as a warehouse. So if you wanted to run next level analysis, you could do that as well. So that's kind of how the platform comes together. I'll very quickly show you a couple of key capabilities, right? So here I'm looking at a Slack application. So it's just a Slack thread. It could be Teams. We support all of that stuff. You'll notice someone from the organization, we make no assumptions here what their technical skill sets are and any of that stuff, but they could come in and ask a question like, hey, do we have dashboards that have such and such data? Or, hey, who's the contact for something? Or how do we define such and such? What you'll notice here is that Metaphor has gone out, looked at all the metadata it has, and basically come up with an answer, right? So this is one of those examples where, yes, you could do search and discovery like normally, where you send people into an application, ask them to go navigate through, this complex hierarchy of tags, perhaps, or make sure you put in the right search terms. So certainly you can do all of that stuff. But isn't this a much more interesting and simpler way for someone to engage? So this is one of those examples where we can make this entire experience of navigating and using the catalog simple through natural language. So that's kind of one way to engage with the platform. Here's the other one, right? So I'm looking at here, for example, at a Power BI dashboard. My questions are, what's this about? Who should I get in touch with? I have questions, et cetera, et cetera. Right. So what we do is provide a little extension. We'll show you a bunch of, definitions, canonical definitions that people might have written about this. You will see the individuals in charge and who you should get in touch with. You would see sort of conversations that are happening about this data set. So for example, people in a different part of the organization might also be using this and they're having a conversation about it. You could kind of tap into that. And you could also see things like technical stuff, right? Like, where's this data coming from? Here's a miniature lineage. Here are some indicators to say, oh, by the way, something upstream of it is broken. There are errors, so be cautious about using this piece of information, right? So this is the type of stuff where having a platform that looks across all of these modalities make it just that much easier. And with that, let me just very quickly show you around our app, right? So this is the front page of the app. You'll notice it looks a little bit like a social media stream. And for good reason. What we're really trying to do is make it easier for people to engage with the platform and see something familiar. So in this case, I've logged in. This is my colleague. And the system knows that because both of us use the same data set or perhaps use the same dashboard. And here are the relevant conversations. So it's kind of like hyper-personalized this thing already as I've come into the application. I can certainly search around with a whole bunch of different ways. But let me very quickly go into this asset. So here we're looking at a single table, say within Snowflake. You'll see a lot of technical metadata, usage information, freshness information. This is that data quality issue that it tagged and brought up over there. And you'll also see fairly complex lineage in this whole thing, right? And this is one of those examples where all of this lineage, pretty much in this particular example, 99.9% of this lineage is automatically computed for you. So literally on day one, as we've scanned all of your different systems, we will go out and compute the lineage for the warehouses, the dashboards, the ETLs in the middle, all of that stuff. And as you engage with each of these nodes, you'll get to see lots of other signals bring out, right? Like, oh, these are the people who are querying it. Here's who's talking about it. Or in the case of, say, this dashboard, here's who's looking at the dashboard. What time of the day are they looking at it? So this is the kind of things where, as a if you're trying to make changes to these tables, you now automatically know exactly what is downstream, who is downstream, what are they doing with it, etc. So you can make really high quality decisions instead of kind of like going around the place and trying to figure out what's going on, who to get in touch with, etc. Um, I'll show you one other capability here, top queries. This is basically kind of like a curated list of the top queries associated with this asset. And really where it comes from is this query explorer. So it's kind of like the query log for this system. We'll go out and get everyone who's queried against the system. And then once you hit this, explain with AI, we're essentially giving you a summary of the query. We're giving you a technical breakdown of what's going on in the query. So think about a scenario where you could either read, 1,000 lines of SQL code, or you could get a quick hit with this. And oh, by the way, your data steward has already sort of curated this for you. So I know when I'm coming into this table or this asset or what have you, these are really the top 5 or 10 queries I should care about. So that becomes another really easy way for someone to sort of navigate and get value from it. And the very last thing I'll mention is here's another AI capability we've sort of built out. Think about scenarios where you're looking at an asset and you know that there are multiple duplicates of this asset all over the place. Maybe created an error, maybe created just because over time people have built up a lot of crud in the system, so to speak. So here you could very quickly figure out like, hey, these two tables are mostly similar. They are different by this one column, for example. Or this could also be, instead of just finding duplicates for, purposes of sort of health of the system, you could also look for similar tables which are interesting for you to query because, they might have some different metrics you might have not seen before. So you kind of want to tap into that. So just to give you a sense of, the experience from the point of view of let's say an analyst or a data scientist coming into this thing, now they're getting this highly curated experience of everything that they need to know about this table or dashboard, if it happens to be a dashboard, see lots of relevant metadata, see all of these similarity things, and pretty much be useful on day one instead of having to go ask 20 other people in the organization, hey, is this table the right one? Should I be using this? I think someone told me about some other table over there, right? So all of that conversation can now happen right in the app without them spending all of that cycles, doing unnecessary stuff. So very high level, that's kind of what we do. We've got lots of other capabilities in here. There's a big amount of AI in the document center. We've got domains, etc. So if you're doing data mesh, that could be interesting. Happy to talk at some point. Reach out to us if you want a demo and all of that. We'd be happy to go through all that.
Yeah, and I'll just kind of chime in and maybe bring you in back to the conversation, Aaron. One thing I love about that approach, and I think this is a good rule of thumb for all data catalog vendors, is to encourage use of the technology. When you buy a tool, it offers no value if it isn't used. So it has to be easy to use. And I like, again, this sort of outside in approach of capturing what people are already talking about on Slack or in Microsoft Teams. That is very, very productive because you're picking up on what people are talking about. It's almost like if you could put a sensor at the water cooler with a real-time translator like just pump it up to HQ, like, hey, the natives are getting restless here. You might want to like raise their salaries or something. Get them colder water. They're upset it's not cold. But what do you think, Aaron?
No, absolutely. I mean, that's, it goes to what we saw in our survey regarding collaboration and knowledge sharing, right? And I think the point is that once you stand the data catalog up, um, you know, from, years past when we were really, before we had this generation of tools, when we were really just, talking about data dictionary, for example, one of the reasons why these projects would sometimes die on the vine is because there wasn't any real or collaboration was difficult. There wasn't an easy route for people to get in and participate and to validate, for example. I mean, you really want people within the organization from all over the organization who know this data to be able to essentially bring their knowledge into the picture and improve, the data catalog, get you more reliable data. So that's a critical piece. And Kirit, with the Metaphor product, I think he just demonstrated that's why they've placed such a heavy emphasis on it.
Yeah,
Yeah, we
exactly.
go
Yeah.
ahead.
And I'd say, the whole thing about uh, having people do the work themselves versus having the system sort of self-serve, like, what if the system could in fact tell you, hey, by the way, there's some interesting conversations going on. Let me highlight that for you. By the way, it's related to the data set that you were querying yesterday, for example. Now suddenly it becomes a much more engaging and richer experience that they didn't have to go out and search for themselves to begin with.
Well, and this is a standard rule of thumb in marketing, I can tell you for sure, is relevance. When the information you get from a system is highly relevant to what you're working on, you're going to love it. That's what people want. They want relevant information. They don't want irrelevant information. So in marketing, that would be spam. When you get spam and you have no interest in some product, you're like, why is this in my inbox? Get out of here. You create a negative customer experience. But when it's relevant, and to your point, Kirit, notices the system knows, oh, you were querying this yesterday. Did you notice that this is out here as well? That's a tremendously powerful recommendation. It is data driven, it's semantically aligned, and it's highly relevant, right, Kiran?
Absolutely. So, there's a diagram I didn't show you, but we specifically understand who you are, meaning what have you been querying, what data dashboards have you been looking at, and we start producing responses and answers that are relevant to you. So instead of looking at tens of thousands of assets, which typically exist in larger enterprises, now we've sort of hyper personalized the catalog just for you. It's literally Eric's own catalog. And that's the magical piece that we bring together.
That's interesting, and I'll throw it back over to Aaron because again, relevance and focus. You cannot absorb 10,000 data points at once. No human being can, and you want what's relevant to you. So, the whole discoverability side of the equation is very compelling when you're noticing who a user is, which data sets they're looking at. You think about some of the algorithms that they use on Twitter or LinkedIn or other places. From what I've seen, kind of simplistic. Maybe they're getting better, but it's like on Twitter, you'd follow someone or you'd react to one of their things, and all of a sudden they're at the top every time. Like, okay, I don't want them all the time. I do think it's interesting, but be a little bit more nuanced, be a little bit richer in your context. And Aaron, the business context enrichment was pretty high up there, right?
It was. And I think what you're talking about there, though, I mean, your initial point about how I think in older versions of these products, somebody would log in and then it'd be very intimidating. Wouldn't be personalized. You'd be looking at just so much data and maybe not even know where to start, right? But it really with the way these products are being designed now, with what Kira's talking about, is you can have, I think, really maybe the best way to personalize is probably a combination of configuring it towards let's say individual teams, right? Because let's say your accounting team might have completely different emphasis in terms of what they want to see and what they're interested in, as opposed to a data analytics group. But we now have the capabilities of these products where we can bring some focus to it and personalize it a little bit. And I think that's really critical in terms of when people walk into the data catalog not just being completely overwhelmed.
Yeah, that's a good point. We got a couple good questions from the audience here. One is asking, how many data catalog vendors are there? And in the research, I think we saw about 8 or 9 who were listed as being known by the respondents. And again, it wasn't a huge response group, but they are professionals, they're data professionals, they're in the industry, and they list, like I say, about 8 or 9 of the big ones. And there are probably about 20 of them overall, including some very interesting open source technologies too. I was a little surprised again to see the concern about open source, but maybe Kirit, I'll throw that over to you. That question, how many are there? But also, someone's asking, how do we go about finding the right one for us? What's the advice that you give your clients? I'll throw it to Kirit and then Aaron jump in on that. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think the really useful thing is kind of like Aaron was talking about, try to understand where you are as an organization, what's your maturity from that perspective. I think that forms kind of like the basis of trying to figure out what catalog you want to bring in, right? So, and at that point, you want to see like what value are you trying to drive? How much time and effort are you willing to spend doing the cat herding that's normally required from some of these, let's call them old school catalogs. And then, how much do you value AI being an accelerator and a sort of magical experience for your customers? If those kind of things are important, then you know where to look within the framework of catalogs that are out there. There's one way to go, which is the legacy ones, or you look at some of these modern technologies that are out there. So yeah, and I'll also throw in again, happy to chat offline if that's of interest. We can certainly help customers sort of work through those kind of decision processes.
Yeah, sure. And Aaron, you obviously are in this industry and you've gone out and gotten certification on some of these platforms, which takes time, takes effort. They can be very complex tools. It is important to obviously do a bake off. If you're going to go buy one of these things, you want to talk to multiple vendors, get your short list, and understand like what are some of the basics that you would throw out there that the company should already know and appreciate and understand as they enter the process of that search.
Sure. Um, I would say, the features that are really sort of cutting edge and where we really couldn't even necessarily imagine where we are now, let's say even 4 or 5 years ago, come down to, I mean, the harvesting piece just takes so much of the heavy lifting out. I mean, it used to be just this monumental effort for people just to gather the metadata. So, you obviously want to choose a product that has that piece of it, makes it easy for you to interrogate your data assets. But getting back to search, also, I haven't talked really all that much, about that. But search, as basic as it might seem, when, like I say, Google searches are getting easier all the time and so forth. But people are expecting a lot more out of search these days, and it makes sense. I mean, because that's your access point. It's like, how quickly can you get good data about your data? And then certainly the collaboration, we've talked about that a bit here, but the collaboration aspects. I mean, the fact that Metaphor, and one of the points that Kirit has emphasized, I know, with their product is that you oftentimes don't need the front end app of Metaphor to really get involved. You can go right through Slack or Teams, and just essentially join a conversation about your data that way. So these are all features that have come up so much and are so far beyond what they were just a few years ago. But those are features that I wouldn't get left behind and pick a product that kind of was not necessarily up to snuff on those features.
Yeah, it's a good point. And you mentioned the harvesting. I'll throw this over to you, Kirat. I think it was Elation, if my memory serves me correctly, when they came on the market. They were focused on dynamically capturing, scanning your information architecture, basically, and giving you a baseline to start from. To me, that is really mission critical because to go and just try to manually connect to this system, to that system, you're never going to get there. It's like climbing a mountain that gets taller every day. You're never going to get to the top of it and you'll never be able to see. Like that's the beautiful thing about getting to the top of the mountain. You can now see everywhere and survey the land. And that's kind of what you want from a data catalog. You want to be able to get to the top of the catalog, look all around and see all the different terms and understand what's out there. So if you can dynamically scan these environments and capture the metadata, which of course is what you guys are doing, to me, that is mission critical to succeed, to ensure a good level of success or a good chance of success. You must be able to dynamically pull in this data. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we consider that a literally a let's say a day zero problem. So even when we're doing POCs with customers, we don't actually sit down and start engaging and going through all the other details till all the information is pulled in and the lineage is automatically created. So yeah, I agree with you, and I'll say from our vantage point, like 99.9% of the content that's in our catalogs from our customers, it's all automatic. It all happens at whatever frequency they want. Usually it's nightly, but it can be faster than that. Uh, that's, I dare say it's a non-issue at this point for us. We've
Interesting.
gotten to that point.
And how do you actually do that? Are you connecting to the network? Are you connecting to databases by JDBC or something? Can you get into the weeds a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So our crawlers are all Python based. They're all open source. We can run it off our SaaS environment, or customers could run it on their premises if required. But it's basically harvesting metadata. Specifically, we don't touch data. We are only interested in, the definitions and things of that sort. And so we go and get metadata from, let's say, Snowflake, from, Databricks. You name the platform, we support those. And if it's API based, say a Tableau or a Power BI, will go use their APIs to go and get all that stuff in. We get all that data and metadata into our environment. We compute lineage out of that. And basically within a few minutes, it's ready for you to look and see inside the browser.
Yeah, yeah, that's good stuff. And then ideally, you want this to be baked into your reporting architecture. Like when you change a definition somewhere, you want some downstream report to reflect that. So is that how Metaphor works? Is that you are in between all the different source systems, you're capturing the metadata. When a definition is changed, like revenue, for example, how we actually categorize revenue or how we define customer or how we define prospect, you want all that to be reflected downstream in your reporting environment. Is that right?
Absolutely. So better analogy is, we use a concept called following, which is kind of like you're expressing kind of like following a Facebook group or a LinkedIn group. So you could signal your interest. Hey, I'm interested in these tables, these dashboards, what have you. And basically, as the system monitors and figures out something has changed, it will keep you updated. So it'll reach out to you on Slack or Teams and say, hey, by the way, this report you were looking at, this definition has changed, or this definition for this table has changed, or the owners have changed, et cetera, et cetera. So all of those things are basically just pushed to you instead of you having to go look at it every single day.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thoughts from you, Aaron, on what surprised you from the results? Anything jump out at you as being a little bit odd?
Not necessarily odd. I mean, it definitely confirmed what I would have expected, and I think that's good, right? I mean, right off the bat, I would say the first question, how critical are data catalogs to an organization? I'm not exactly sure how I would have constructed a show if we had gotten, really negative responses on that one. Not important at all. I would have been a really interesting show, I guess. But I think it's clear that certainly within the data space, right? And certainly amongst our respondents, there's a recognition that, I really think it goes beyond that. Is anybody you talk to who's involved in data will say that, we really are at a point where we have the tools. And some of these platforms are very sophisticated now, where we can really cut through a lot of confusion around data. My the example I usually point to is an onboarding. If you have a new data analyst, how long does it take him for to be up and running, and actually doing analysis? And oftentimes, still, many organizations, it can take 2 or 3 months of just familiarizing yourself with the data landscape.
Right.
This is really what we're trying to get at. It really shouldn't take that long. If we can bring these tools to bear, you can get people doing what they're really paid to do and get them up and running quickly.
Yeah, that's a good point. And we do have a number of very specific questions here. We had a couple questions around government agencies and are they using data catalogs? I mean, goodness gracious, when you think about the raw amount of data that you have in these organizations, it would be very nice to have, especially a dynamically generated and then curated model to understand what information is where and which information we can use and what the freshness of all that stuff is. So we're kind of moving in that direction, and I think that's very good news. I did want to bring up one other of these questions, and folks, feel free to reach out to me afterwards or either of these gentlemen online. You can get me info at insideanalysis.com. Oh, there's a question around unstructured data or data that's not completely structured. And Kirit, I'll throw it over to you. You are capturing these conversations people have, and so they'll use terms. Are you actually siphoning out or using a semantic capability to recognize, this term I don't have yet. Should we incorporate this into the catalog? Does that happen?
Yeah, there's absolutely a version of that. So you can take conversations that have happened on Slack or Teams. There's a mode where you can say automatically detect if this is related to data, and
Hmm.
it'll,
Wow.
basically prompt you to say, hey, you should persist this. This looks like institutional knowledge that could be valuable to folks. So that happens. We can also look at if you have content within your internal wikis, your SharePoints, etc., we can go profile all of that. So when you ask the natural language question, hey, what's the meaning of such and such? If you already have a description in some other system, we can go harvest it from there, but then also point you to the right assets within our environment to make the connection for you. So yeah, there's a lot of that harvesting of sorts that happens to give you really better answers.
And last question for each of you. What about generative AI? Keyword, I'll throw it over to you first, and then Aaron, are you using generative AI? What are the risks around that? And I'll just throw out my caveat because some of these models they get to, let's say, 80% accuracy. Okay, it's good considering what they're doing. It's amazing that they get to an 80% accuracy, but what part of your business can be wrong 20% of the time? Not much. I mean, it's good for
Right.
co-pilots. It's good for getting you 80% of the way there with some code, for example, or marketing language, and that's fine if it's internally focused. But once you start exposing it to the outside world, even 95%, what part of your business could be wrong 5% of the time? Probably not too much. But what are your thoughts about generative AI and its use in this data catalog space, Kirit?
Yeah, so we're very bullish on it, but we also realize completely that this is in its infancy. Like you said, there's enough hallucinations going around. The model we've developed, our internal sort of framework is there is a certain class of questions where it's okay for the system to hallucinate. So when you're saying, hey, generate for me a new business glossary term, great. There's an acceptable amount of thing there because you want people to ultimately, sign off on it and say thumbs up or thumbs down. But on
Right.
the other side, there are absolutely questions like, hey, I need a SQL query to do such and such. There we become extremely sort of defensive and conservative in our answers. So we spend a lot of time building on safeguards so that it does not spit out something that we are not confident on. And it's basically based on the reality of what exists in the catalog. So we will not say, oh, I see this table, let me generate some random query for you. No, no, it's going to be based on queries that have been in the past. It's still a massive accelerator, but it's not based on a hallucination.
Right. It's an accelerator. That's a great way to use it to refer to it. Aaron, Gen AI and its role in data catalogs?
Sure. Um, I think, and just to add to what Kirit said, and I'd be curious to see if he agrees. A good model can be, let your AI do the heavy lifting. Let your AI come up with, let's say, your initial data definition, or if you have, let's say, you have a data quality flag that's being, AI can actually, you can use AI for that and come up with like an initial data quality rating where you say like, yes, we can trust this query, that type of thing. However, I think having the human overlay and kind of the final sign off be a human being, it can be very important there, right? That way, it's kind of like you're saving the person who's in the role of curating and providing that definition with some effort, but then you still allow a human being to have the final say.
I love it. And we like to run these shows like clockwork, folks. So the hour is coming upon us. If you want to be on one of these shows, send me an email, info@insideanalysis.com. Also, reach out to Aaron Wilson, Aaron Wilson on LinkedIn, or Kirit Basu, Kirit, last name Basu on LinkedIn. I'm sure they'd be happy to answer your questions there. This is a hot space. I'm very excited to see so much excitement and intention around the use of data catalogs because they are the semantic glue that holds together information systems. And we need these data catalogs to help us understand what the data means, to improve data literacy. And I promise that's going to improve every last aspect of your business. And with that, we'll bid you farewell, folks. Thanks so much for your time and attention. We'll talk to you next time. Take care. Bye bye.